Hello again. So here we are again. So I'm sorry about the delay. That kind of is happening at the minute because I've just got stuff going on and I don't know how I feel about doing things publicly anymore. So I'm going to do the historical context for Brexit playlist that I said I was going to do. And I kind of laid out in the last video what I was going to do, and I said that the first one I was going to look at was Rome. And I explained that what I was going to do... Now, the reason that I look at history is always to look at periods of crisis and continuity. So, the points in time where the world has changed dramatically. And what I'm interested in during those periods is what stayed the same, what endured, and what changed. And usually, I'm kind of having a look at a lot of different components of a belief system. And what I wanted to do with the way that I talked about the transformation of the Roman Empire is to show you a little bit how the stories that we tell ourselves are formed, and then how they change, and how we have to review them. And also, like with the transformation of the Roman Empire, it's actually a useful framework to look at the different components of the belief system that we have now emerging, especially the things that are kind of at odds and where, you know, there's a lot in flux at the minute. So up until probably quite recently, probably in the last 5 years, my understanding had been that somewhere in around about 576 the Roman Empire had fallen and it ended, and the successor to Rome was the Roman Catholic Church, and I kind of understood a little bit about what had happened, but I never really paid much attention to this, and I had certainly never broadened my understanding of history in the way that I have done in the last 5 years or so. So this story that we all know, which is that the Roman Empire fell, that the Catholic Church came into being, and there was a big dramatic catastrophe and we don't know what it was because it was far too long ago. And then out of the ether came the backbone of Europe. I think there's a saying that from the ribs of Europe came the spine, from the ribs of the Roman Empire came the spine of Europe. And so I watched a lecture series by a guy called Paul Friedman, I think. I'll put the lecture series underneath, and I have watched this lecture series about, I swear to God, every lecture in it at least 4 or 5 times. And this really, really opened up my understanding of this period. And I found out that my understanding was nothing like what actually happened. But that my understanding of what had happened to Rome was integral to the way that I perceived the history of the country that I was in. Then I had a framework to look at the way that, you know, the Romans left, and then it was, you know, Anglo-Saxon invasion, and then it was Vikings. This has all been bollocks. These stories that I have based my entire understanding of the world on, complete bollocks, all of it. So first of all, the Roman Empire didn't end till the 14th century, and it ended with the fall of Constantinople in Turkey and the start of the Ottoman Empire, which is an interesting story I'm going to tell later. But I wanted to talk first about what it is that happened that I had learned was the end of the Roman Empire, because it was not this at all. And before you start looking at what happened to end, you have to ask yourself what Rome was. And the Roman Empire was a vast empire that covered just so many countries, west and east. And what it actually was the belief system that held all these different countries together in a coherent framework. So you had a religion, you had an idea of Rome as a citizen. There was an identity of the Roman citizen was at the core of the belief system of Rome. You know, there was the economics of Rome. You know, this is a highly developed economy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the back end of the Roman Empire. Now, I am not a classicist. I'm not even a fucking historian. But the bit that I'm really interested in is the last few hundred years. And I'm particularly become very, very interested in Rome during a period under a man called the Emperor Diocletian. And I am particularly interested in the reforms that this emperor put in place and what they signified. Now, the Emperor Diocletian, he comes to power to end what's actually a crisis for the Roman Empire, which is where the Roman military have figured out that they can topple emperors. And by this time they've been deifying emperors and making them gods, and the Roman belief system, the religious belief system, has been kind of under threat for a long time. And you can read Tacitus 200 years earlier, and he's really, although he very strongly still believes in the gods, he's very concerned that this deification of emperors is going to really piss off the gods. And so you have this Roman religion as a belief system. Now Diocletian, he believed very, very strongly that a new religion that was emerging called Christianity was a threat to Rome. And this is a religion that's spreading quite rapidly in the lower classes. The spread of Christianity was not through the upper classes originally, it was through the lower classes. But he very firmly believed that Christianity was a threat to Rome. And what we understand about the Emperor Diocletian is that he's the emperor responsible for the absolute height of the persecutions. But in actual fact, Diocletian, that period, is much more interested in this. Now Diocletian, he inherits a Roman Empire where there's an economic imbalance that's opening up. And the East, they are fucking thriving. They are, there is a civilization gap opening up here. There is an economic imbalance that's holding up, that's emerging here, that is recognized under Diocletian. Because what he does is, one of the things that he reorganizes in Rome is he kind of solidifies this division between West and East, which actually is a very important division for us to understand, because it's still the one we bloody use. And Diocletian, he establishes this thing called the Tetrarchy, which is, he actually formalizes that there is a Western Rome and there is an Eastern Rome, and there are different, and he establishes that there will be, I think it's, I remember it's 4 or 2. I think it's an emperor and a deputy emperor in the West, and one in the East. But that might be wrong, I'll check that. But he's also, he's a military man, and he's a very gifted bureaucrat. And he also, he faces 3 main problems as far as I can see. One is the encroachments on Rome from external factors. So you've got the Persians, who are incredibly sophisticated at this point. And you really need to keep a focus on what I'm saying about the East, because there's a lot coming from the East. And we kind of tell these stories like enter stage left, the foreign invaders, but actually this is a very important story that's opening up in the East. So he has this issue of how to kind of deal with that, how to maintain internal coherence, and there's also an issue about succession. And this is a really important issue. Diocletian is trying to solve the problem of how do you have a stable system of succession so that Rome continues as a belief system. But he very strongly believes that Christians are a threat to Rome. And, and not only does he he basically, the best way to describe what Diocletian does is it's Keynesian reform. It's centralization, it's bureaucratization, it's militarization. He's trying to make Rome much more organized, but he's trying to introduce price stability, which he doesn't manage at all. And the reason that he's trying to introduce price stability is because Rome did not exist on its own. The planet was exactly as the planet is now, but at this point, China are really, really getting very powerful and very rich. And as a consequence, what we would describe as the Middle East, the Silk Roads, which are like the economic nervous system of the world, are being born here. And you can read historians that are going back between China and Rome. I read one Han historian who was writing about sheep farming in the Byzantium. It was really, really good. He was doing really, really well until he explained how the locals harvested the sheep that were attached to the ground by their abdomen and caught the sheep before the wool floated off, because he never thought he was going to have an audience who had a sheep. So there's this economic imbalances going on. There's impacts on prices coming from externally, but what's also going on is that there are internal tensions in Rome. So the western half of the Roman Empire is getting poor, and they're finding it increasingly difficult to sustain parity with the East. And this whole central identity of the Roman is not coping well with this economic disparity. And we see that in Europe when we brought in Eastern European nations into the EU. These tensions open up about, well, who's contributing what, and why is this legacy identity for this city, Rome, actually so important when all the economic activity is over here and in the east? And Diocletian's reforms, they stabilise Rome. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's a lot that happened under Diocletian, including the persecution of the Christians, which people have attributed the end of the Roman Empire to. But Diocletian stabilises Rome. And he does this by increasing bureaucratization, increasing militarization, increasing punitive laws that are about Rome and the other, and about increasing the sense of Roman identity by doing this. And it's during this period that the Roman games, where the Christians are persecuted, become big business. Like, the number of Roman games during this period just mushrooms. But these are paid for by private people. This is not imposed from up top. This is not Diocletian saying, I want games where Christians are persecuted. This is Roman citizens who are buying into this completely. And the way that the sense of the Roman citizen is being strengthened is the expansion of the other.